Embrace the suck. Fuck your mood, follow the plan. Effort is grossly underrated. These mantras flood our feeds, they shape our definition of success, and they elevate the entrepreneur not just as a job but as a way of being, a hero of self-agency. We live in a culture that glorifies what's called internal locus of control, which is the belief that your outcomes in life are a direct result of your own action. It's empowering, yes, but at the same time, you cannot deny it has become kind of a religion these days. Every setback, your fault. Didn't succeed, try harder. Still struggling, you didn't want it enough. But what if that's not always true? What if internal locus of control, taken to the extreme, actually blind us from understanding the world? Today, I want to explore why we demonize external locus of control and why reclaiming it, not rejecting it, it is actually essential. And to do that, I want to talk about someone who has recently become the spokesperson for this shift, Gary Stevenson, also known as GarysEconomics. Gary isn't a self-help guru, he was one of the best traders at the young age of 23, making millions by predicting a rising inequality would reshape the economy.
Just explain how that happens. Why does the wealth go to the top?
The simplest way is, Rishi Sunak suddenly magically appeared in the Times richest people, top 100 richest people in the country. Wealth of £700 million. I think what people often don't realise is the passive income that comes with that. So if Rishi Sunak's worth £700 million, what's his passive income? And when I say passive income, I mean that the income he gets just from his wealth, not from his work. He's going to make around 5%, £35 million a year. Let's be conservative, £26 million a year, £500,000 a week. So imagine you're Rishi Sunak now and you're making £500,000 passive income a week. How much are you going to spend?
Not a lot of it.
You spend, 50 grand a week, live like the Queen, basically. I couldn't spend 50 grand a week if I tried, right? So the problem is, once you have this group of society with very large passive income, unless you have a rapidly growing economy, they basically have nothing they can do with that income other than buy up the rest of the assets. It's as simple as that. It's basically compound interest. If you have the wealth of the rich growing at 5% in an economy that's growing at 1 or 2%, there's nothing they can do. They outgrow the economy and they squeeze everyone else out. And what ordinary people see is house prices going up, stock prices going up, my kids can't afford the house. And what that is the rich squeezing the middle class out. It's the kids of the rich outbidding your kids.
His insights are powerful, but they also require something that the grind culture rejects: the willingness to admit that your personal effort isn't always enough, that sometimes systems overpower individuals. There are times where being too internal can have serious consequences. Research by Kurt April and colleagues examined this very problem. They found that people with extreme internality, those who take full responsibility for everything, often pay a price. They become overstressed, blaming themselves for everything that happens. They suffer from anxiety because they can't shift responsibility or blame. They feel guilt and self-criticism when they fall short of their goals. They fear losing control, leading to rigidity, and they often don't trust others' abilities, leading to insecurity and loneliness. In a world that preaches you're in charge of your destiny, these side effects are rarely talked about, but they're real and they're very common.
The thing that causes mental health issues is the feeling of having no agency or no control over your circumstances until the world changes the whole economic system.
I never told people don't work hard. I never once said that. Never once said that.
You said if your dad wasn't rich, you'll never be rich.
Which is true in 99.9% of cases. I've never told people don't work
That's
hard.
actually
I've
not
never
true in
told people-
99%
listen,
of cases.
I've never told people don't work hard, okay? And listen, if you think that Ugandans should be more entrepreneurial, I've never been to Uganda, maybe that's the problem out there, maybe that's the problem in Nigeria, maybe that's the problem in India. Listen, I've never said don't work hard, okay? When I brought my book out last year, the hardback, I was at some event and I come out, I was drinking in London Bridge. And I come out late, it was like 1 a.m. And some guy come up to me when I was unlocking my bike. Some guy from Newcastle, which is the northeast of England. It's this quite poor town. There's a lot of working class people there. And he said, I've been watching you on YouTube and I love your stuff. And this guy started crying. This guy started crying on the street, right, in front of me. He's like, I work so hard, Gary. I work 2 jobs. My mum's sick, and I'm trying to help. I'm trying to support, and I don't understand why. And I'm sorry that I'm crying, but nobody ever told me that it wasn't my fault before. That's what he said to me, okay? And listen. I believe 100% aspiration, ambition, entrepreneurial spirit. I would never see a kid that has that and say, turn it off, okay? But the flip side of if you just work hard enough, you can make it, is if you didn't make it, it's because you didn't work hard enough and it's your fault. And I would like you to sit and think very hard before you send that message to young men and young women in our society.
This brings us to a core misconception in the self-help world. Growth mindset and locus of control are related but not the same thing. Let me clarify. Growth mindset is the belief that you can improve through learning and persistence. It's about being flexible, adapting to feedback, seeking new strategies, staying curious. Locus of control, on the other end, is about where you assign causality. Internal says, I make things happen, and external says, things happen to me or through forces beyond my control. Most people assume that a growth mindset means you must always have an internal locus of control, but that's not true. In fact, being cognitively flexible, truly growth-oriented, sometimes requires acknowledging external realities. Because here's the thing, you can't out-asshole a broken healthcare system, you can't mindset your way around wage stagnation, global markets, or structural inequality, and more importantly, you shouldn't have to. Recognizing external forces isn't a weakness, it's wisdom to a certain extent. It's also the foundation of something else we often overlook, which is specialization. Specialization is the opposite of trying to do everything yourself. It's the recognition that the odds, the constraint, the leverage point, the rare moments where your effort will actually move the needle can only be tracked if you commit serious time and energy to understand a single domain deeply. You can't specialize without some belief in external structure. You have to believe the world is more than just your willpower. You need to study it, partner with it, respond to it. That's what craft people, scientists, and true experts do. One of the best examples of this appears in the TED Talk, Why Do We Celebrate Incompetent Leaders?
But there's another culprit at work as well, what I like to call the action fallacy. Our mistaken belief that the best leaders are those who generate the most noise, action, and sensational activity in the most dramatic circumstances. In other words, we confuse a good story for good leadership. But the two are not the same. As a matter of fact, very often, good leadership will result in a bad story. Let me explain. Imagine leadership for one moment not as a polar explorer charting a new course or a CEO motivating her staff, but as the simple act of swimming across a river. And not just any river. Imagine a violent river with waves crashing together and rocks lurking somewhere below the surface. If a swimmer ventures in haphazardly, without being aware of his own capabilities or the currents, and nearly drowns, but splashes around wildly, fights with all his strength, and somehow, miraculously, manages to drag himself back to safety, those of us looking on will notice him. And we will probably say, wow, what a guy. He really fought hard to get himself out of that crisis. And if instead we have a swimmer who has studied the river for years and knows just where and when to enter the water and how to turn her body in subtle ways, and so lets the current carry her across, we probably won't notice her. And if we do, we would probably say, that looks pretty easy. Shackleton and Amundsen are a case in point. Shackleton, our candidate B, is best known for his ill-fated endurance expedition, which set off in the summer of 1914 and saw his ship become trapped and eventually crushed by the ice off Antarctica. And he and his men were then forced to undertake a dangerous trek across the ice and brave some of the stormiest seas on Earth before finally reaching the safety of South Georgia in the summer of 1916. Now, Shackleton was a tenacious man, no doubt. And his is a captivating story, fit for Hollywood. In fact, it was made into a TV series starring a young Kenneth Branagh. But it is not a story fit to draw leadership lessons from. Because admirable though his efforts were, the crisis that beset him was largely self-inflicted. He overlooked the advice from local whalers who told him the ice was particularly dangerous that season. And he overlooked massive deficits in his equipment, preparation, crew selection, and training. And it gets worse. Rarely highlighted in the many books that celebrate his leadership qualities is the fact that the expedition's other ship, the Aurora, suffered an even graver crisis, the result of which was 3 lost lives. In contrast, the expeditions of Roald Amundsen make for boring reading, not because he was lucky, but because based on his intimate knowledge of the polar environment, his careful and deliberate planning, and his authentic and innovative leadership in the field, he managed to reduce the problems that his team encountered to a bare minimum. In 1905, he achieved in a tiny fishing vessel what the mighty British Navy had failed to do the previous 8 decades, to find and navigate the Northwest Passage above the Canadian mainland. In 1911, he reached the South Pole, a journey of 3,000 kilometers across hazardous and uncharted terrain, and arrived back at his camp after 99 days, just 1 day off his planned schedule. If Shackleton is the swimmer who rushes recklessly into the water without understanding the currents or his own capabilities, Amundsen is the swimmer who has spent a lifetime humbly studying the river before entering the water in just the right spot at just the right time, and so makes it look easy.
So, according to the action fallacy, we praise leaders who jump into crisis with bold gesture while ignoring the quiet competence of those who prevent crisis through knowledge, foresight, and yes, an understanding of external conditions. We build a culture that overvalues visible control and undervalues systemic awareness. So maybe the goal isn't to always push harder. Maybe it is to learn when to zoom out, when to specialize, and when to let go of the illusion that everything is in your hands. Because agency, at the end of the day, isn't about control. It's about knowing where your control ends and where collaboration, structure, and context begin.